Hi, I'm Soren Bjornstad, and today I'm going to demonstrate my workflow for taking notes on and creating flashcards from things that I read and want to remember using RemNote. So I wrote this little ditty in my Zettelkasten, I guess about a year ago here, about watching experts use software and how I think it's very helpful just to see what other people do when they're doing some kind of workflow. It doesn't need to be like presented super carefully or necessarily designed for learning. It can be a very useful supplement to resources that focus on all those things specifically, just to see how it actually works when you're used to it, when you found something that works for you. Oftentimes it's really easy to pick up lots of good tips and see things that you've done slightly differently that way. I also think it's often difficult for people to understand how to create good spaced repetition flashcards, what kinds of things they should create when they're taking notes on something. So I'm kind of hoping to shed some light on all of this stuff just by running through a chapter of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, which I figure a lot of people watching this will probably be familiar with. It's kind of a cognitive science classic, even if you haven't read it. So we're just going to go through chapter 1. Might not be super exciting, but I think it's a good demo of the kinds of things that many people who come to spaced repetition looking for the ability to learn more from what they read will be able to apply effectively. So let's see, I've pulled up the book on Amazon Cloud Reader here. Normally I would actually have the book or my Kindle in front of me on the desk and read off of there, but this way I can have it right on the screen so I can point to things and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, you can't copy out of Cloud Reader, presumably for copyright reasons, so we'll have to retype some stuff, which is kind of silly given that it's right on the computer and we should be able to copy paste it, but whatever. I'm going to also show RemNote here. There we go. So my first action here in RemNote is going to be to create a new document for the book. Now, I should mention before I go any further, this is not specific to RemNote necessarily. I find RemNote the best tool currently for taking notes on a book. Depending on what you're doing, a simpler flashcard tool like Anki might be good for many use cases. I would still certainly work fine for this. I'm very tool agnostic as far as spaced repetition goes. But I find RemNote is the easiest, the most integrated, and I also work there, so I'm slightly biased. But anyway, this is exactly what I would do normally. So you can see I've got a nice little hierarchy over here of categories. There are a lot of different ways you could choose to organize your documents in RemNote or not organize them at all, but that's not what this video is about, so I'm just going to explain that. I would come down to my 300-399 science, mathematics, and something. It's not giving me a tooltip. There we go. An engineering category, and specifically this is definitely human studies, and probably psychology is by far the closest thing that we are going to find here. So we are going to create a new document here, and in my numbering system we're just going to give it the next number after this. It'll be 321.06, and it'll be called Thinking Fast and Slow, and we're going to make that into a document. This is Control-Alt-Shift-D, and then we're going to zoom into it. This is Control-Apostrophe. And I'm going to, no, I'm not going to add a source because I don't have a link for this. I guess I could link to the book. I don't know. It's not what I normally do, but we'll go ahead and actually link to the page, I guess, because why not? What I definitely do is I include a metadata section here, so I can remember some basic information about the book if I have any of it. Two important things that I like to include are the author and the year of publication. Author, obviously, it's useful to know who said the things that you're learning, and year of publication, you know, if things might get out of date, or it's just always useful context to know when you are thinking about a book or article. So I'm going to use descriptor cards for these. So we're going to have author, and then I'm going to type 2 semicolons to create a descriptor card. You can see it became italicized there. And this is going to be Daniel Kahneman, and I'm not sure if I already have something for him. I do, so I'm just going to link to that by pressing the bracket key and clicking on it. And that's got a number on it. That's fine. And then year published. I'm going to have to find the copyright page of the book to figure this out. Kindle books often have the copyright page in weird places, so it's sometimes kind of hard to find it. Here it is. It's at the end. It is 2011. Okay, we'll go back to where we were. And let's actually open. We're going to skip the introduction and go to chapter 1 because that makes more sense. So I'm just going to try to, obviously I've read this book before. Maybe that's not obvious. I have read this book before. And you may even see a handful of highlights in here that I've highlighted from previous times running through it, but I haven't taken any notes on it or created any flashcards from it, and it's been a little while. I just very briefly looked at the chapter to make sure it was appropriate for this discussion and would have some stuff we could talk about, but other than that, I am going to be basically reading it as we go through. Obviously, we're supposed to imagine that this woman is angry, or see that she is in the picture, see that the picture of her is. And I'm not going to read this to you. You can read, but I'll read through it and I'll point out when I have thoughts or want to mention something about it. Oh, and over here we should just go ahead and start by entering a chapter heading. And I usually like to put in the number and the title of the chapter. So the exact format will differ depending on the book, but we'll say chapter 1, characters of the story. And I'm going to make this into a heading. Usually don't like to use heading 1 because it's the same as the title, and I find if I need more than 2 levels of clearly defined heading, I'm probably doing it wrong. So we're going to go Control-Alt-2 there as the tooltip. Very helpfully told me as I actually did it. So here we go. So we can see that Kahneman is trying to give us a distinction between 2 systems, which are the focus of the book, right? There's System 1 and there's System 2, and these are going to be the characters of the story. I can tell you already from having read this before. And so this angry woman is an example of System 1. We just intuitively knew that as soon as we looked at the picture. We didn't intend to assess her mood or anticipate what she might do, and the reaction wasn't something we did, we just experienced it. Okay, now there's a multiplication problem, right? 17 times 24. And so I'm being asked to try to solve it here. I guess that's on the next page here, right? Oh, yeah. If you haven't done so, you should attempt the problem now. So I'm going to do that. Let's see, I got a index card here, and I'm going to multiply 17 times 24. So there's 7 times 4 is 8. We're going to carry the 2, and then cross multiply the other digits. So that's 14 plus 2 is 16 plus 4, 20. Carry the 2 and plus 2, that's going to be 408. So you kind of saw what I did there, and we're supposed to have experienced slow thinking right here. So we had to very explicitly decide, hey, we're going to multiply some numbers based on the instruction from the author here. I had to actually write it down in order to keep track of what I was doing. And the whole thing was deliberate, effortful, and orderly. So we can stop here now. I tend to like to read, a couple paragraphs at a time typically. If I try to take notes exactly as I'm going along, what will typically happen is that I don't necessarily have the full big picture, and so I will have trouble figuring out maybe what things are important and how I should structure that information as I do it. So I probably should have explained that before I just ran through reading these here. And there's still a question here, right? Should I stop? Or should I wait for a more clearly defined explanation of what he just had us do? And let's see how far this is. This is actually quite long. So let's pause for a moment here and think, what kind of information should we write down at this point? So we know that we've been told there are these two different modes of thinking here. There's clearly the fast thinking and the slow thinking, and there's effortful things, there's non-effortful things. I think we can skip this and move on, because we can kind of hold in our mind still all of that information here, and we can quickly page back here in a moment. So let's continue through the beginning of this section here. Let's write over here System 1 and System 2, just so that we can keep track that those things should be there, and maybe we'll start just recording a couple of characteristics under here. We may not keep it in exactly this format, but handily this is a computer, and we can very quickly reformat and change what we've written. So I find that can be very helpful just to keep track of what you've been thinking you want to write to make sure that you don't forget it again. So something we might want to write down is who came up with this. I don't particularly care in this case. If it was something we were studying academically, that would probably be more important and we could include it. And so let's start writing down a few characteristics here. So System 1 operates automatically and quickly. No feeling of effort or voluntary control. And this is operates only with a deliberate choice to use it. It's a little awkward, but that's fine. Feeling of agency and concentration. Now this seems really important here, right? When we think of ourselves, we identify with system 2, but really a lot of what's going on inside of us is system 1. So let's mention that real briefly here. Ourselves, space intentional here with, and I'm going to link to system 1 to indicate that this is a concept that we're referring back to here. If you're familiar with RemNote, this will create a link in both directions between it, so we can see everywhere that we've talked about system 1 down here, which is kind of neat. And I screwed that up because I was talking at the same time. We identify ourselves with system 2. This feels slightly ironic. But actually, apparently I was using system 1 when selecting that reference. Tend to identify ourselves with system 2, but actually much of our, behavior is thanks to or controlled by, let's say influenced by, perhaps would be a good way to put that, system 1. So you'll note that I haven't actually created any flashcards yet, so I'm going to come back in a minute and reformat these into flashcards and figure out what's the best way to structure these. Sometimes I'll just create flashcards right as I go. Other times, when I'm not entirely sure exactly what I want to turn into flashcards, I'll start just by making notes of what things I want to focus on, and then we'll tweak the formatting shortly. Okay, this is another good piece here for our distinction table here. So let's see, system 2 constructs thoughts using an orderly series of steps. Let's put those in quotes. And system 1 can come up with complex ideas, but they happen all at once and not in an orderly fashion. They happen, but they are created all at once. Be invited to think of the two systems as agents, sure. Okay, and here's some examples. So this is going to be a great thing in terms of learning some examples and most importantly, testing that we're able to come up with new examples and correctly categorize things. So this can often be something of a challenge to write good flashcards for, but I have some ideas for us. So let's say examples, and I'm just going to pick out a couple of examples. I'm not going to, since I can't copy and paste these and I'm going to retype the entire thing, I'm just going to pick a couple, much like I would with a paper book, to figure out which ones are the most important. So let's say identify the answer to 2 plus 2, read the words on a billboard, let's say read and understand, because that's really what's involuntary, is the understanding from the symbols. Detect which of two objects is more distant. Yeah, let's go with 3. 3 seems good. So we'll do examples down here too. Is there anything else we need to grab on this page? All these events belong with the angry woman, right? Innate skills we share with other animals. That could be interesting. Let's read a little more. Yes, okay, so there's some of them are innate and some of them can be created through practice. How should we define this? Let's make this into a category, characteristics, so that then we can talk about it separately. And let's say then here, some System 1 tools, I'm not going to bother to reference this because I'm underneath it already. Some System 1 behaviors are innate and often shared with other animals, while some are can be learned. Now I notice here we didn't include any behaviors that can be learned, so let's mention one here. I didn't love this chess one so much because most of us are not chess masters. But let's make up our own since we understand what system 1 is, right? So let's say ride a bicycle on an ordinary road. Might have to think about mountain biking if we're not used to it. Okay. Well, some can be learned, and some require extremely complex expertise, let's say, just to emphasize the chess component. Several actions are involuntary. Oh, this is interesting, right? So some activities are completely involuntary, whereas some of them are normally involuntary but can be controlled voluntarily, like chewing or breathing or what have you. So let's say some system 1 behaviors are completely involuntary and uncontrollable, while others are normally involuntary but can be controlled if desired. Sure. Okay, system 2. Examples. It's kind of annoying that they're here, so I can't choose 3 all in one go. This is good. So count the number of A's in a page of text. Fill out a government form. Park a car in a narrow space. Let's leave space for an addition of something that's a category that I didn't include if they have a similar thing to what we just had in System 2 where I had to add the riding a bicycle one. So other characteristics here. Yeah, this is interesting. So you have to direct your attention in the appropriate place. So operates effectively only if you pay attention. And give deliberate effort. I don't know if we need to say that. Let's just say operates effectively only if you pay attention. That's fine. Often requires, say, like pre-setting your mind to the task. Let's include an example because that's not 100% clear. So let's say deciding to look for a particular person in a crowd as you observe it. You'll notice here that I'm often consciously trying to avoid copying his wording or the exact choices. I think this is maybe not necessary, but very helpful, especially if you're already having to retype it. If you can save a lot of time by copying and pasting, maybe there's more of a case to be made for just keeping the original examples in wording. But generally, it's easier to learn and remember things when you put them in your own terms. They're connecting better in that case with what you already know. And the way you learn things is by connecting them to things you already know. That's basically just how memory works. It associates two things so that when you think of one, you're more likely to think of the other. It also means you have to actually be sure you understand what's being said. You can't just kind of select parts of the text and, block them out, turn them into blanks or what have you. You have to actually understand what's being said so that you can rephrase it in your own words and figure out how to state it. So not necessary, but I find it very helpful and not necessarily all that much more difficult in most cases. Right. Consistent maintenance requires continuous exertion. Continuous, I'm not sure I picked that up. Let's say if you decide to pay attention and maintain focus on the task at hand, let's say. And you have a limited amount of attention. You can't usually do multiple System 2 tasks at once. And if you try, they won't go well. For example, don't try to multiply 2-digit numbers while turning left through heavy traffic, as he says over there on the right, which is great. Certainly should not try to compute the product of 17 times 24 while making a left turn. I would say try this at home and see how it goes, but I feel like that could be construed as giving me some liability. So even though I'm sure you're sensible enough not to do that, don't do that. And this is interesting too, right? So everybody understands this. People are not going to carry on a complex conversation with you when they see you passing a truck on a 2-lane road. So maybe we need to expand this a little bit more. If you try, neither task will go well. And social expectations involve letting people be while they perform a System 2 task. That's a little awkward, but this probably won't be the final form anyway, so I'll just leave it there. And let's put the example into too, because that's a good example. Adults stop talking while the driver is passing a truck on a narrow road. And then there's this whole great passage, which I remember from looking at it previously here about the gorilla, right? Always fun to watch every time, pretty much. And I apparently either hadn't seen that version before or forgot about it because I still missed the curtain and the person leaving the game. So let's see. This switched pages on us. Here we go. Invisible gorilla. So actually, we should probably grab a link to this and include it in our notes. Copy that. So let's just say I'll do a universal descriptor here. Example. The invisible gorilla. I can spell invisible. And there's our link. So if we need to have a fun 1-minute diversion in the future, we can go there again. I want to say a little bit more about this, how it's like you become blind to other things. Can require such intense focus that you become blind to other events. We'll tab this over. And this is a really important point, right? We're also blind to the blindness. So not only do we not see the other events, we also don't realize that we're missing them. Because that's an important distinction. Sometimes, you didn't, catch somebody else's conversation somewhere, but you might actually know that you missed something. Not in this case. Okay, this is a separate section. Let's stop here because I think this is going to be sufficiently different that it's a good time to take a break and clean up these nodes. So I'm going to maximize this for a moment, and we're going to think about how we can turn this into flashcards. So we have created these two. These were super easy because it's a very obvious thing. And if you're not familiar with RemNote, the way this shows up, if we click on this, is it's going to show the entire hierarchy above it. So it'll actually even show me what category it's in up here. But then this document is going to show up at the top, and then any bullets above it underneath. So we can see just from looking at this card, even though all we typed is author on the front of the card, we can pretty clearly see that it's asking us for the author of Thinking Fast and Slow. And there's our answer on the back. So this is going to be the notation that we use throughout for these front and back cards. So one thing I'd like to do is turn these into concepts. So a concept in RemNote is just a way of marking a particular noun or idea as its own thing. This just makes it in semi-bold and gives us some other kind of useful little distinctions. For instance, they will come up more readily in search when you're looking for it, because it's the kind of thing that you're more likely to be looking for than if I search for complex, I'm probably not super interested in this. Bullet can come up with complex ideas. But if the name of a concept contained complex, it would be much, much more likely that I was interested in that. I can give make the concept into a concept card with a backside if I want to. I'm not sure if I want to in this case because the definition is kind of going to be provided by the items under it, but we'll think about that for a minute. One thing that I might like to do is make this into a descriptor, but then I should probably have a backside on it, and I'm not sure I want to do that, so let's not do that. It'll be fine. I probably do not want to, so one kind of straightforward way that I could do this right was I could say, what are the characteristics of system 1? And then on the back it would be being asked to provide this list. And the way that I could do this in RemNote, right, is I could make these into card items. In this case, I would have a flashcard here. It would ask me, what are the 3 characteristics of system 1? And then I have to come up with these. If you've read any of my other stuff on spaced repetition, or you just know a lot about spaced repetition, this is generally not a good idea. It's not at all obvious what's supposed to be on the back. It's not necessarily clear exactly what answer would qualify as a correct answer to it. And because of that, it's going to be really hard to get a good repetition in on it. I'm probably going to give a slightly different answer every time. And when you do that, that means that the amount your memory is strengthened is reduced compared with something that's more consistent. And it's also just way more frustrating to study because it's less likely you're going to get it right, and it's hard to think of all these things. So we're going to want to make this a little bit more precise here. So one kind of straightforward thing that we can do, and I think I'm going to start with this, is creating cloze deletions. Well, maybe not, because these are going to be kind of hard to make cloze deletions from. So, one thing that we could do, I'm just going to turn text references off so it's less distracting here. I could do these. The way this card is going to look is, that's a little bit too small to really clearly see the flashcards. Let's just zoom in and let's do this. I will report that bug since I work here. So this is just going to ask us, to fill in these words. It operates automatically and effortlessly, quickly. Okay, see, that's another reason why this isn't good, because I was just looking at it and I can't give the correct answer. So this is a pretty poor flashcard. So I'm going to try to do this differently. So I think the best way I'm going to be able to phrase this is to kind of give a description of what the thing is, and then you try to explain it in more detail. This is a tough one to have started with here. But that's good. Put me on the spot. So it operates automatically and quickly. So let's say speed. So now we're being asked to describe, what is the speed of that system 1 operates at. And this flashcard will look like this, right? And this is not quite right. The word operates shouldn't be there. It should just be, and maybe speed isn't right. So speed is quickly, but let's see, like speed and, let's start with this. Automatic, quick, let's see, speed and ease, maybe, let's say. This could maybe be improved slightly, but it's one of those kind of cards that it might not be clear exactly what's the best way to phrase it until I've actually seen it in review when I'm not thinking about it here. So this is something that I very frequently do, is once I start actually going through the flashcards later, I will have some minor changes to make. And so I try to get them good, but I don't try to get them perfect on the initial pass, because chances are, even if you work pretty hard to get them perfect, at some point you're going to find things that you didn't do right. So it's better just to do a first pass, get them pretty good, and then leave it at that. So let's say effortfulness. That seems okay. No feeling of effort or voluntary control. And how are we going to do this one? This is a little bit more, it's kind of a different structure than these. So characteristics, you can come up with complex ideas, but they're created all at once and not in an orderly fashion. So let's say the key question about this is kind of like its sequential nature or its logicalness, but I don't think if I make a descriptor called saying logicalness that I'm going to be able to figure it out. So I'm going to try to write a sentence for this one. So I'm going to say, although system 1 can produce complex ideas, unlike system 2, I cannot produce these ideas through, I'm going to do a close deletion here, like a series of orderly steps. I think that expresses this idea. Oops, I did not want to take a screenshot. I think that expresses this idea pretty clearly, and doesn't really lose something. It doesn't really lose much from it. But also, I will be able to actually answer this question when it comes up for review, which is pretty important. All right, so here are examples. Now, I probably don't want to just memorize these examples, right? Again, here, I could say, you know what? I want to memorize these examples. And then I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to say, what are the examples of System 1? But this is a stupid card because if you've read and understood this, you could come up with probably like 200 examples of System 1 if you were given enough time and were feeling really patient. There's a lot of things about daily life that are very System 1 that you could come up with easily. Same thing for System 2, because people do a lot of different activities, and most of them, probably all of them, fall into one or the other of these buckets. Furthermore, there's nothing special about these examples, right? If somebody comes up and asks me on the street or in a conversation or on an exam, what are some examples of System 1 behaviors? It's not really useful to come up with these examples rather than some other ones. So what we really want to test is not our memory of these particular examples, but rather our ability to create examples. So a very simple way that we can do this is by actually creating a card that just asks us to create an example. So I have a thing that starts with this. Here we go, example. Try to pick a new one. And then on the back of this, so this is just asking, what's an example of System 1? We should probably try to rephrase this slightly so it's slightly less awkward. And let's see, example. Try to pick a new one of a System 1 behavior. I don't know if behavior is quite the right word, but it's good enough for my purposes. And then on the back, I'm just going to put some examples of it. And since I already have these, normally I would just write them like this. So I'd say like e.g., identify the answer to 2 + 2, read and understand a billboard, etc., etc. This is going to make my notes a little bit less useful. So this is kind of a thing you have to think about with RemNote sometimes. Is this is useful both as flashcards and as notes, and sometimes you have to make a few compromises or tweaks to make them most useful in both of those roles. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say one of these, and I don't know how I want to do this. This is something that I actually haven't explored very much. I don't remember having had one of these situations before. One thing I could probably do is I could say extra card detail. Did that work? Add tag, is that a thing you can do? Yeah, let's just do it like this. It's probably a faster way to do this. Okay, and then when I look at this, I should see the examples below. So this is maybe a little bit ugly. There might be a cleaner way to do this that I haven't thought of, but it will work. So we'll just leave it at that for now. And then let's, while we're thinking about it, do exactly the same thing lower down. So we're just gonna actually copy. I didn't want to copy that. I just wanted to copy this rem. Control A. Selection's not working how I anticipated. We'll just do it like this. And right here we'll have example. Try to pick a new one of a System 2 behavior. One of these, and these are going to go right there, and they're going to be extra card detail. One way that I could do this faster, I think, is I can come in here and there's like an option called copy rem as tag. And then I should just be able to paste it onto there. So just to show how this would actually work. Okay. Now I should just be able to actually highlight them and hit paste, and there it is. So that's what I should have done from the start. I actually think this might even be an option, like on the, yeah, I can right click and do copy tag on there, so I wouldn't have to zoom into it like I just did. Okay, so we got these. Let's since these are actually descriptions of System 1 itself, I'm going to move these up a level. This is kind of how the concept descriptor framework is supposed to work. You have a concept, and then you have some pieces describing it. So we don't need this characteristics heading anymore. That's fine. This is also describing System 1 here. Even though that's in a different format, it's a complete sentence like that. Let's, instead of saying one of these, let's say, for example, one of these. Let me explain this in a little bit more detail here, right? So example, try to pick a new one. The goal here is that every time you do this, you're going to come up with different examples of a System 1 behavior that you've never come up with before. So the goal is to kind of get your creative juices flowing. Think, what's something maybe that I've been thinking about recently that I've been doing that qualifies as a System 1 behavior. And so these are only here in case you forget what's a System 1 behavior. Then on the back of the card, when you see it, you can be like, oh yeah, that's the kind of thing that's a System 1 behavior, and then maybe you'll be able to come up with one at that point. So these are just examples. In fact, ideally you would never give one of these at all because we've already come up with these four, and we're trying to come up with a new one every time we do it. So that's why on the back I say, for example, one of these, because the goal isn't that you come up with one of those specific examples, it's that you make up a new one. And, that's try to pick a new one. I know how these work, but sometimes when you're sitting in your review queue and you're going through a bunch of flashcards, if you're not pretty careful about the wording, you can just kind of carelessly end up doing something different. If you don't have this phrase, try to pick a new one, I find that I often actually forget to try to pick a new one, even though I've been doing this type of card for a couple years. So it is actually pretty important with spaced repetition cards exactly how you word it. It's kind of like poetry in a way. Your choices matter a lot in terms of how well you're going to remember it. That's one of the reasons that it's kind of difficult to learn. It just takes kind of doing it a lot to understand which things are important, which things aren't important, and for the important things, exactly how you should work on those. All right, so these two here. Some System 1 behaviors are innate, while some can be learned, and some require extremely complex expertise. So this is probably going to be split into a couple of bullets, but I think we're going to start with a descriptor. So let's say innate or learned, and we'll say, right, some of each, or let's just go with and then I'm going to add an example to each of these to make it make sense. For example, let's say, I'm just using the ones up here, right? Detect which object is more distant, while some can be learned, e.g. reading. Some require very complex expertise. Do we need to include that? Let's just include it on the back. So if we include something on the back of a flashcard, we can't be quite so sure that we're going to remember it. So it's more useful for low-value information. Let's even do it like this. Let's say some learned behaviors are relatively easy, while others are extremely difficult, e.g. Expert chess. Evaluating chess positions at an expert level. And then again, I'm going to do extra card detail on this. I don't usually use extra card detail that much. It's generally not a good idea to have a ton of stuff on the back of your card, but this is kind of a hack, so this is really the first time I've actually used extra card detail. And again, what that does is it just includes it on the back of your card underneath a little line there. When it's a sub rem or a child of the actual flash card. All right, so we took care of that one. We'll delete that. And let's say voluntariness. I think that's how you spell that, if that's a word. Either involuntary or either exclusively involuntary or usually involuntary, but sometimes consciously controllable. Now, this is not perfect. I can foresee a problem with this already, right? We kind of have two things on the back here. From the front of the card, just seeing voluntariness, it's not entirely clear that there are really kind of two things here. We're asking, are these System 1 behaviors things that you do only voluntarily. These are implicit questions we're asking, understand. Are system 1 behaviors things which you specifically have to decide to do always, or are they not that? That's kind of what's implied to me by this voluntariness, right? We are asking that question. We're also asking this much more specific question, which is, what are the two different types of involuntary behaviors that can be handled by system 1? Now I might decide, I don't really care that much. Maybe that's not that important of a question. We're kind of digging into this a lot for a kind of, flippant remark in chapter 1 of a book which has like 40 chapters, and which I'm just reading because I'm interested in this stuff. It's not necessarily super practical for me, especially this introduction. Probably if I forget this, it's not going to make me misclassify things as system 1 or system 2. So I think in most cases I would probably just be happy with this. But because this is an example, I'm going to challenge myself to see if I can find a better way to do it. I don't immediately know of one, so I'm just going to have to think about it and do this off the cuff. So one thing we could do is just literally ask a couple questions. This might be the best way to do it if we care. So we can say, are system 1 behaviors, do system 1 behaviors require a conscious decision to begin? This is kind of involuntary is doing the work of a lot of words here, but it's important to be specific because we are trying to split this up into separate questions. There might be a better way to phrase it, but I'm not going to come up with it while I'm on live video. And so the answer is no, they can proceed involuntarily. They can't always proceed involuntarily, let's say, if they're system 1 behaviors. Otherwise, they'd be system 2 behaviors requiring conscious control, operating only with a deliberate choice to use them. And so the second part of this question then would be, can system 1 behaviors be consciously controlled if desired? And the answer here is sometimes, right? And so I'm going to include a thing here, always, sometimes, never, which is just a pattern I like to use here. I like it better than yes, no, because it provides more information. I don't really like yes, no questions in most cases. We might even think if there's a way we can improve this slightly. So I'm going to say always, sometimes, never can system 1 behaviors to be consciously controlled if desired. Sometimes. For example, breathing is normally involuntary, but can be controlled if desired. However, you can't say one can't. It just feels more right here. However, one can't choose not to read a sign when looking at it. So, this applies to some, but not others, is the clear description of this. So, I'm just trying to think if there's a better way that we can do this. Splitting it up will sometimes require other compromises like this. Let's also make this one an always, sometimes, never. I think that's fine. And let's say, do system 1 behaviors require a conscious decision to begin? And the answer is never. They can always proceed involuntarily. And I'm going to say, but C, can system 1 behaviors be consciously controlled if desired? So just another use of the linking. I could put this on the back of the card with extra card detail. Kind of a judgment call. I don't think I'm going to look at it. I don't think it's that important. I'm going to see both of these in my flashcard cues when I review, so I'm just going to leave this as part of the notes and not worry about making it part of a flashcard. Okay, so now this one's duplicated, so we're going to delete that one. I'm going to move this up. I just like to have all the descriptors sitting together. And I'm also going to move this down. Tend to prefer things which are questions to be, or in this case, clozes to be kind of at the bottom of a section. Maybe that's just me being really orderly and wanting them, all the things which are in the same font, to show up next to each other. But I find that unless there's actually kind of different sections, conceptual sections, in which case I should probably do sub-bullets anyway and, indent these all one more level. It's generally doesn't impede understanding to do it that way, and it also looks better and it's easier to find things of a particular type when you're looking for them. All right, hopefully system 2 will be a little faster now that we've talked about this. So if we look at this, actually what I'm going to do is open this in a second pane over here since we've got the whole screen. This might be a little bit easier if we cross-compare them like this. So over here, let's see. I'm going to try to use the same descriptors if possible, just so that they're parallel. This also makes it less likely that we accidentally learn the difference between System 1 and System 2 cards purely by the wording. So, it's very easy to do what Andy Matuszak has called pattern matching, which is a great term, where what you learn on the card is not actually the information that you want to learn. It's that, the words speed and ease on the front of the card means that this is System 1 and it's automatic and quick, which is not really very useful because in real life you're not going to be primed to retrieve this information with the phrase speed and ease, at least not likely. Maybe if you're a student and you copy this off a study guide, it might show up on the test that way, but I'm not a student. I'm just reading this book because I want to know the information in it, and so I want to be 100% sure, or I can't be 100% sure, I want to be highly confident that I will remember this information when I actually encounter it in my everyday life. Otherwise, why did I waste my time studying this flashcard a whole bunch of times? So it's important that the flashcard actually will test the thing that I want to remember in as close to the context that I want to remember it as possible. So let's say speed and ease, slow and deliberate. We don't have an exact one that corresponds to that, but that's pretty close. Effortfulness is going to be requires a deliberate choice and concentration. Let's copy this one and do a similar thing with the series of orderly steps. So let's say, unlike System 1, System 2 is capable of producing results using a series of orderly steps. I don't know, this one feels slightly more vague than this one, and like I might have a little bit more trouble reproducing it. Another way that I could say this is I could say it's capable of producing results using what thought process, but that doesn't really feel like it solves the problem. That would look like this. A series of orderly steps. I don't know if that's quite right. One thing that RemNote makes kind of difficult, that if we were using a freer form flashcards program, I might immediately jump to, would be saying, a series of orderly steps is characteristic of which system. This is a good card, but it's got a pretty significant problem in RemNote because of the, the organization of our notes, because we're also making them notes as well as flashcards of which system. We'll say, System 1 or System 2. When we put this on the back, we're going to say System 2. But then, if we actually try to review this flashcard, what we're going to see is this is underneath System 2. So, presumably this is going to be characteristic of System 2. This is what we call giving the answer away in a very unhelpful manner. So if we want to use this card, let's just say we want to use this card, we're going to hop up one level, and we're going to have to put it somewhere else. I'm going to put this under a section called System 1 and System 2 typically. I could say System 1 and System 2, and then I'd indent these. That seems kind of pointless in this case because this entire chapter is about the difference between System 1 and System 2 and describing them. So I guess I'm just going to put this here, and I'll put it underneath there. We already kind of have one here, right? So it's going to be okay to have a couple questions outside of there. The only downside of this is that now we don't have a nice one-to-one correspondence between this one and this one, but that's not really that big a deal. It's not like I'm going to be coming through here and carefully comparing them, or that I'm getting graded on that. So we'll leave it there. I'm going to delete this card because we've covered it somewhere else, and we decided that this really isn't the best way to formulate that information. Let's see, we covered this. We covered the feeling of agency and concentration, deliberate choice. That's basically agency in my mind. Might not be in yours. Again, these are your notes. If you're taking notes, you get to pick the wording and the phrasing and the linking and the personal examples, as when I grabbed these sets of examples out of his book that fit best with you and that you think will be the easiest to remember. I think I've mentioned that already, but it's good to mention it again because it's very important. You're going to get better results there anyway. Feel free to do whatever makes you feel good. constructs thoughts using an orderly series of steps. Oh, that was the one that we just bumped up to the parent of this system 2 so that we could cover it without giving the answer away. Okay, attention is limited. This seems important. Okay, so the use effective system 2 work will be ineffective if you're unable to completely pay attention to the task. So this is interesting. Let me explain what was going through my head there as I did this. There are a number of ways we could do this. The question is kind of, how much should we occlude or hide? So here are a couple options that I considered, right? So completely pay attention to the task, completely pay attention to the task, completely pay attention to the task. This is one of the challenges with cloze deletions, is that it's not necessarily always obvious exactly how you should do this. Completely pay attention to the task, if I can type. Another thing that we could do that wouldn't be entirely ridiculous would be completely pay attention to the task, right? So all of these could make sense. They're going to have kind of microscopic but potentially very important differences in how well we're going to be able to recall them. The risk of closing too little is that the answer will be given away by the words which are not hidden. The risk of closing too much is that then you won't know what answer you're supposed to provide. So you kind of have a false positive, false negative thing where, on the one hand, you can have a false positive where you are able to correctly answer the question even if you don't actually know the answer. On the other hand, you can have a false negative where you know the answer perfectly but you still can't answer the question and you keep failing it over and over again even though you know the answer, which is a very frustrating experience. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer for how to do that. One thing that might be helpful here is we could just pick one that seems good and we could see, how does it turn out during review. But let's try to think a little bit about it, just so that you can get an idea of how you would pick one. So let's start with the one that's the most occluded, right? Let's kind of sort these by about how much they occlude, just so that we can, we're not quite sure about those, but this will be better than before. So system 2 work will be ineffective if you're unable to what? That doesn't seem completely ridiculous, so we're probably not leaning too far on the problem of completely closing too much. I guess since that didn't seem absurd, let's try making it more absurd. So if you're unable to completely, so we'll take it even this far. Even this one doesn't seem completely ridiculous. But this one is pretty vague. So system 2 work will be ineffective if what? We can conceivably supply lots of alternative answers to that, right? We could say system 2 work will be ineffective if you're unconscious. System 2 work will be ineffective if you're on LSD. System 2 work will be ineffective if you're a chimpanzee. I don't know if that's true. Chimpanzees are probably decent at system 2 work of some types. System 2 work will be ineffective if you're a mosquito. Most of those are kind of absurd, but just because those are absurd doesn't necessarily mean that you won't think of something else which is true about system 2 work that might be reasonable, but that's not actually the answer here. And then we're going to end up with a false negative where you fail the card even though you actually know the answer. Those are frustrating. And you don't always notice that that's why. You're just like, oh, that's not it, and you flip past it. And then it can sit in your queue for a long time and waste your time. If you're unable to, so this one provides a little bit more information, right? So it's asking specifically about a situation where you're failing to do a particular thing. So system 2 work will be ineffective if you're unable to. This kind of suggests to me anyway, like something about your concentration or your mental state. I don't know for sure if that's just because I'm very well primed to think about this topic because I've been talking about this for like the last 2 or 3 minutes. But that one feels pretty good. Here, this one's giving a little bit more information away, right? It's saying something about the task, but but there's not really a big difference because system 2 work, I think it's kind of already implied that you're performing a specific task that's system 2 work here. So there's probably not a whole lot of difference between these three. Completely as a simple adverb isn't really doing a lot of work here. We could probably remove it without really having much ill effect, so that doesn't seem very different. Here this one is kind of saying, oh, well, there's kind of two concepts here, right? Is pay attention and to the task. I don't like this one for two reasons. One is because the task as a phrase, as we discussed, because of the difference between these not being much, it's kind of already implied that there's a task. This isn't really a thing which is important to learn the task. It's not doing much work here. So it's kind of asking us to recall something on the back of the card that we don't really need to recall specifically. Also, having this 2 in the middle here tends to change our attention into what we might call like lexical or linguistic parsing rather than conceptual parsing. And what I mean by that is you're more trying to fill in these blanks based on what kinds of words would make sense fitting there rather than the concept. And in real life, generally, you're going to use different words, even in your head or in a conversation, every time that you talk about a particular idea that you're trying to learn. And so it's much more effective that way in terms of like the stimulus that's going to lead you to try to remember it, to understand it conceptually. It's also more likely that that information is going to be linked to other information which is how you learn when it is processed conceptually rather than lexically. So I think we can conclusively rule this one out. I don't like this one. Let me just point out something else, which is that I did not merge these clozes. So what this means is that if we look at it, there's actually going to be, when we study it, these actually automatically merged. Okay. It's possible to have these split so that one of them would ask if you're unable to the task, and the other would ask if you're unable to completely pay attention to and that would be significantly worse here even, I think, because it would be like if you're unable to completely pay attention to what, and then we're asking only about the specific thing that we were talking about. My previous discussion was intended to say, we're being asked both of these at once. And the way you can do that in RemNote is just by splitting these or merging them. We don't like this one, we're going to remove it. This one is the smallest. If you're unable to completely to the task, this kind of gives away the most. It's also kind of more in the realm of lexical parsing than the ones above. So I think probably we're going to want one of these 4, and these 3 are all kind of the same. So let's try to decide between these 2, and I feel like this one's a little bit too broad, so I think one of these is probably going to be the best choice. So we're going to say like let's do this one, since we decided that to the task is not a super important thing. So let's delete all the rest of these. Was that the right one? Yeah. Okay. Again, this is not necessarily perfect. We could come up with other ways to improve it. One thing that we might consider doing is adding a Q here in parentheses, which kind of explains what kind of thing we're asking about a little bit more explicitly. Paradoxically, giving more information here can actually lead to better repetitions. Even though it might seem like it's kind of giving away extra information, it makes sense that it makes sure that you're always thinking about the question and what you're trying to recall in the same way every time. And when you think about something in the same way every time, that builds stronger memories. So if you're worried at all that a cloze is going to be a little bit unclear, it can really help to add these. So we're going to say system 2 work will be ineffective if you're unable to completely pay attention to the task. Let's say like, I don't know, cognitive attitude or state of mind. I don't love this. I can't say attention, which would be great because that gives away the answer. Let's say, I don't know, state of mind isn't too bad. We'll leave it there for now. And let's then move these up here. Oops. You can't usually do multiple system 2 tasks at once. So this is an interesting one. How do we ask something interesting about this question, right? My go-to in many cases where it's kind of hard to find that is to ask a why question. These really help, in my experience, just kind of... it's easy. First of all, it's easy to ask questions about why. You can, if you have ever spent much time with a small child, you're probably aware that you can just ask why, on and on and on. And so it's not hard to come up with these questions. Many of them are even quite useful. Even if you're pretty familiar with the subject matter, you can often learn a lot by asking yourself, do I really understand this? What more can we say about this that's interesting? And it's also, it makes you conceptually process the information in a way that some other kinds of questions don't. I hope that's making sense. I'm not entirely sure I stated that very clearly. But so what I want to do with this one, right, is I'm going to ask, why can one not usually do multiple System 2 tasks at once? And the answer is because a System 2 task requires your full attention to perform successfully. And I don't want to put this under this one because this top level is going to give away the answer. It says if you're unable to completely pay attention to the task. So probably this is going to have to do with completely paying attention to the task. So we're going to outdent that one. And then we're going to delete that. So let's say, I don't know, do we need to have this? I really like examples kind of like this. So let's say, what evocative example, this is a pattern that I really like, does, we'll say, Kahneman, spell, and what I'm going to do here is do edit or add alias. I don't really want to use this full name with all the number, so I like to do just the last name as a typical way of referring within a particular document. So we're going to go with that. This is still going to link to the same place, but it's just going to give it a different name. What evocative example does he use to explain the impossibility of performing two System 2 tasks at once? I'll say multiplying, I believe it was 17 times 24. Yeah, 17 times 24 while turning left through heavy traffic. We don't really need to say that neither task will go well because all of us are probably very aware that multiplying 17 times 24 while turning left through heavy traffic will not go well. Okay, this is kind of interesting. What are we going to say about this that's interesting? I don't know. This might be one that we don't need to mention, but it does seem pretty interesting. It's funny that my reaction to finding it's hard to create a flashcard for is, oh, maybe we don't need to learn that at all. But maybe that's not unreasonable. Everything when you're doing a book like this is kind of a cost-benefit analysis. You presumably have a limited number of hours that you're willing to spend creating flashcards for something, especially when you're just kind of doing it on your own time because you're interested. So it makes sense to pick the things that seem highest value, and one aspect of being high value is that it's easy to create a flashcard for it. If that skipping the hard flashcards is going to let you create a whole bunch more flashcards and enjoy it more, that just kind of gives you more and more momentum, and probably keeping going and learning more flashcards is much more important than learning any individual item. So let me just think if there's something that we can say about this. Just because this is a demo, I'm going to be a little more stubborn than I normally would. So I could do another evocative example, right? This is kind of good, but that doesn't necessarily seem like exactly what's the most interesting about this. What's the most interesting about this to me is that everybody understands the impossibility of trying to do this. So let's say because everyone understands that System 2 tasks require attention. Let's make this a cloze deletion. It just feels easier to phrase as one to me. Because everyone understands System 2 tasks require attention, most people will avoid distracting a person who is performing such a task. Again, we have our question of which words should be included in here, right? I think this is probably good. Most people will, who is performing such a task? That feels a little bit awkward. Let's take a person out of here. Let's just say someone. Most people will, someone who is performing such a task. That might give a little bit too much away, but I don't think it does. I'll see if it feels like it when I enter first review. All right, and then there's this question about the blindness, right? And this one. I'm just going to take those out and delete this so that we can declutter this a little bit. System 2 tasks can require such intense focus that this one's a pretty easy close deletion, I think. This doesn't feel like it's going to cause any lexical processing, and it would be fairly difficult to phrase a good question for it. So I think this is a particularly good choice for doing a close deletion there. And do we need to do a flashcard? I don't think we need to do a flashcard. Well, maybe we should do one for this. We don't need to do a flashcard for the gorilla experiment and its link. Although it might be useful to say, what famous experiment demonstrates this. That's really all we need to do to do one for this. And so let's say the... Why can I not backspace this? That seems like a bug. Interesting. And we'll go like this, the invisible gorilla experiment. What I'm actually going to do is turn this into a concept. In case we don't know about the invisible gorilla experiment, I actually do, but we're going to have a concept here. And so let's just describe the invisible gorilla experiment. What's the definition of it? Where... what's the word? Participants are asked to count the number of passes of a basketball. A system 2 task requiring intense concentration while a gorilla passes by. Many people don't notice the gorilla. And just to be correct, in case I come on this some years in the future and have somehow forgotten the experiment, I'm going to mention that it's a person in a gorilla suit rather than a real gorilla. So this is long. This is, in some sense, not a good spaced repetition flashcard. There are many things on the back, right? So there's, I could split this up. I could say invisible gorilla experiment. What task are participants asked to perform? What happens while participants are performing that task? Why does this blindness occur? Because this is a system 2 task requiring intense concentration. I'm not going to do that in this case because what I'm interested in here is just being able to say, hey, first thought, first thing off the top of your head, what happens in the invisible gorilla experiment? Like, what is this experiment? I'm not interested in learning the specific details. I'm just interested in remembering, here's this thing, the invisible gorilla experiment. And if I can, kind of just retain the mental impression of the experiment in my mind, I'm going to consider this card to have fulfilled its task. So while in some sense this is a bad spaced repetition flashcard, I think it's actually exactly what I want here, so I'm not going to go ahead and split it out. And then I'm going to link to it, of course, so that, where is it? There it is. It becomes a reference. All right. I'm just going to say URL here just because I like being specific. You could also do a /source here in RemNote, and then we'd have a link to it directly within there. But this is how I chose to do it. And I wanted to say something about this. I could say, like, what's particularly unusual about this blindness? But I think this is probably actually going to be one just for another one of these closed deletions here. We don't realize what don't we realize besides not seeing the other events. I think this one's going to be pretty straightforward. Requires presetting your mind to the task. This is the one thing that we have not reformulated yet. And is this important? I'm going to add the word priming here because that's a word that's used later in the book, I happen to know, and I think it's a useful thing to add here. It's a well-known concept. I'm just going to leave this one here and not create a flashcard for it for now, especially because in my case, I know that this is coming up later in the book. And that's not necessarily unfair. It's actually fairly common that I will skim a book through or read it quickly and then decide to come back and make flashcards for it. In some sense, this is inefficient, but in another, you have a much better idea once you've done that of what things are important. Also, sometimes you read a book and don't know if it's going to be worth creating flashcards for, or more than a few very simple ones. And so it helps to make sure that you don't waste your time and fill your review queue with a bunch of flashcards that are something that's not really all that valuable. So that's not the only way to do it by any means, but it is a way that I often do it. I'm going to bump back up here to thinking fast and slow, and we're just going to review at a higher level here. What are the things here? This one we need to turn into a flashcard too if we want to. And I'm going to do this real simple. I'm just going to block these out. System 2, System 1. I'm going to make sure that these are merged together. Because if these were split, right, we would see we tend to identify ourselves with System 2, but actually much of our behavior is influenced by and that would be giving the answer away. So we need to be asked to review these at the same time so that it's not obvious which one is 2 and which one is 1. Now, there is one interesting thing here that this does not cover, right? This just covers, can you remember which is which? Like, which we tend to identify with and which of our, which actually influences much of our behavior. It's maybe not the number one thing that we want to learn from this. I don't feel like if you understand System 1 and System 2, you're going to have trouble answering that question in pretty much any case. So in some sense, this is more of like a, review, make sure you understand how to use these terms question. It's not necessarily testing the actual interesting piece of information that was why I wrote down this bullet point. Why I wrote down this bullet point is, recognizing that it's interesting that we identify ourselves with this one system, but much more of it is controlled by this other thing than we think. So I'm going to try to think of if there's a way that I could phrase this instead, or perhaps in addition. Often adding additional questions is a great way to clarify and make sure that you test all the things you want. It's not bad to have a little bit of redundancy there as long as each one is asking the question in a different way or introducing a different idea. So let's think about this here. Let's say, why, why? I'm not sure why is the right question here. What's inaccurate about our identification of our personal identity with System 2? Actually, we bring out System 2 only in specific circumstances. Many of our actions are actually controlled primarily or exclusively by System 1. I don't like this word accurate. I'm going to say instead incomplete about our identification of our, maybe like personal identity is not quite complete either. What's incomplete about our identification of our like conscious choices, maybe our choices, but conscious choices are System 2. Our actions, maybe just actions and personal identity with System 2. I think this covers it. I'm going to link this one. Well, we can kind of choose. This one's outside of the System 1 and System 2 hierarchy, so I think it's good to link them. But we only really need one per. I don't need to link both of these to System 2. All right. I was originally going to go all the way through the chapter, but this ended up taking quite a long time already. It would not, of course, take me nearly this long to do this in practice. It's a fairly demanding thing. I've created quite a few flashcards here. How many have I created here? I've created 24 flashcards. Creating flashcards is not nearly as easy as reading. It does take some time and effort. But, of course, a lot of time was spent figuring out how to express what I'm thinking, as well as actually doing the thoughts. Kind of turn this into more of a System 2 task, although this is always a System 2 task to be real about it. It's never going to become completely easy. Certainly becomes easier, but it doesn't become intuitive, at least not in the 10-ish years I've been doing it. But I think this was a very good demo in many ways. I've brought out quite a few of my favorite patterns. Oh, you know what? I wanted to talk very briefly about this pattern about the evocative example. There are a couple of reasons why I like this. One of them is I find it kind of takes you back into the mindset of reading a little bit more to remember, what was the example they used. Also, these are really useful if you're trying to explain the thing to somebody else, if you remember it. You tell somebody, oh, it's impossible to perform two System 2 tasks at once. And they're like, well, what does that mean? Even if they understand System 2, it might not be obvious, but everyone can immediately identify with understanding that it would be impossible to multiply 17 times 24 while turning left through heavy traffic. At least if you've driven or ridden a bike or anything even remotely like that, it's pretty darn clear that, oh yeah, that doesn't work. Even if you think, I'm good at multitasking, you can realize that that's more about being able to do some System 1 tasks at the same time as a single System 2 task in most cases, or rapidly switching between System 2 tasks. Actually doing these concurrently when they're both System 2 tasks is very clearly impossible. So when you do come across these examples you like, I definitely support including those in here. And this means that we're kind of doing two kinds of examples, right? We're recording specific examples, and we're also asking the person studying the flashcards to come up with new examples. And both of these patterns are super useful, but it's important to keep track of which one you're doing. Sometimes you might want to do both. That's kind of actually what I did here with this extra card detail pattern that I literally just invented during this video. I've never done that in RemNote before, where I both listed some of these in a form that's really nice and easy to do in notes, and am asking myself in the future to come back and generate new ones. To round this off, I just want to actually flip through the flashcards. I think this might be instructive to see kind of what we ended up with, and also to catch if there are any obvious errors that I made, which sometimes only become clear once you're actually reviewing. So in RemNote, we can review in a particular document by choosing this practice rem. I can choose practice all flashcards or practice with spaced repetition. Practice all flashcards is even going to show ones that are not currently due for review. In this case, nothing's due for review, so they should be exactly equivalent. Practice all flashcards is still going to record the review history, but I'll just choose this one because I think it makes sense. So I'll just kind of talk through these two. What is the effortfulness of System 1? It is effortless. It just kind of happens in the background without you realizing it. No feeling of effort or voluntary control. That was easily recalled. Series of orderly steps is characteristic of which system? That's System 2. That was actually required a little bit of effort, so I'm going to say recalled with effort. So this is an experiment where there's a very famous video. You're asked to count number of passes of basketball, and a gorilla runs across. Now, pause here. This, in my repetition, required a few seconds, probably longer than I would love a card to be. I'm fairly certain that that's only because I had to verbalize all of it out loud to you, which I would not normally do. I would just kind of think about it. And while that might result in a slightly vague repetition if I'm not trying to verbalize it, as I said, that's exactly what I want here. But I will note that that's slightly different than what I expected. So I will keep an eye on this card in the future and make sure that it's still accomplishing my goals. But I'm going to say easily recalled because I don't really need to see that for a while. I'm going to say easily recalled even though that took a little bit of effort because I'm very familiar with the invisible gorilla experiment. Not a problem there. I knew about it many years ago prior to this. So in fact, I could probably push it to 2 months and it would be fine, but there's just no button for that. So if I just hit easy a couple times, it will very quickly get out there anyway. Author of this, Kahneman. Easy. Effortfulness of System 2. This always requires conscious effort and often quite a bit of concentration. Perfect. That was 2011, I remember. Tend to identify ourselves with System 2, but actually much of it is influenced by System 1. Couldn't forget that. Just talked about it 2 minutes ago for like 5 minutes. System 1 behaviors do not require a conscious decision to begin. Don't require. Keyword here, require. And this isn't always, sometimes, never. So what I should say is sometimes, because it's not true that they never... is that true? No, actually this should be never. They never require a conscious decision. There we go. This was a little bit confusing. Let's think about whether there's something we could do to improve it. So let's say do System 1 behaviors. Wonder if even just phrasing this as a statement instead of a question might help. System 1, and the word require is confusing because it makes it into a binary question. System 1 behaviors are begun by a conscious decision, period. Never, hold on, this changed the result, because system 1 behaviors can be begun by a conscious decision. And we already have another question under this, I know, that covers that. System 1 behaviors, let's flip this around. System 1 behaviors are cannot begin without a conscious decision. This is just stupid. Maybe this is a poor fit for always, sometimes, never. So even though I don't generally like yes, no, it's clear that the attempt to improve it by turning it into always, sometimes, never just confused matters and made the card worse. So must system 1, 2 behaviors do system 1 behaviors require a conscious decision to perform? No, they can. They can proceed involuntarily in all cases where they're useful. Let's just say they can proceed involuntarily. All right, done editing. Can system 1 behaviors be consciously controlled if desired? Sometimes. It depends on the behavior. This one's much easier. System 1, very fast, very easy, doesn't require effort. Innate or learned, system 1 can be either. This is actually a trick question. And usually I like to mention, if I do that this is a trick question flashcard pattern. I find these quite useful. Oftentimes in real life, you encounter a situation where the question is wrong, and you need to recognize that the question is wrong. It's kind of forcing me into a schema that's not relevant here, that it must be either innate or learned for all system 1 behaviors. And so sometimes what might appear bad, which is to have a question that's asking something that doesn't have a correct answer, is actually exactly what you want, specifically because the questions aren't always right in real life. The focus on being precise with your questions and answers in spaced repetition is not that they must always be perfectly correct, but the thing on the front of the card is the exact context and the exact prompt to which in answer you want to be able to give the information on the back of the card. And so in here, if I ask myself, well, are system 1 behaviors innate or learned? I want to remember, oh, it can be some of either. So it makes sense. I could also phrase this as an always, sometimes, never question. That would be fine. But for variety, and because this might be something you could confuse, I think it's probably a good idea to do this as a trick question. So we'll do that. Example of a system 1 behavior. I'm supposed to try to pick a new one. So an example of a system 1 behavior that I can do without thought is talking to you right now. I just kind of think the words, and my mouth moves and my throat moves, and it's actually extremely complicated. But I don't have to put conscious thought into how I move my vocal cords. In fact, I can't do that, which makes learning to sing better very difficult. Requires a lot of kind of tricks to get your system 1 to actually do it the way you want to. That's a much more thoroughly explained answer that I would need to give in most cases, but I felt like explaining it. That one's easily recalled. And as you can see, just to go back, so if I had not been able to answer that, I would be able to use these 4 examples here to figure out, oh yeah, that's what it wanted me to come up with a behavior like this. And I would likely be able to give one at that point, and I could say, forgot, so that I would see it again and get more practice generating new examples of system 1 behaviors in the near future. System 1 can produce complex ideas, but unlike System 2, it can't produce these ideas through conscious effort, through an ordered series of steps. Okay, this one's interesting. I didn't immediately come up with the specific answer that I was looking for on the card, so maybe that we can make it slightly clearer. Unlike System 2, let's add a cue here, and let's say, I'm debating whether I should write logical process or process. Let's write the longer ones. The challenge with logical process is that logical might prime us a little bit more than we want for a series of orderly steps, making it a little bit too easy to answer. But I think this is not so much of an issue the way this question is phrased, because what I'm trying the prompt that I'm trying to use as a cue for myself is like, what's the difference between System 1 and System 2 in terms of the process they can use? Maybe saying that, I said process, but I didn't say logical. The question is that one of them is slightly more logical. So because of that, I'm going to change my opinion there just from saying it out loud to you. And I'm going to just say process. And if that's still not clear, I can try to maybe say logical process, or maybe even recast the question into a different form. What's incomplete about our identification of our actions and personal identity with System 2? Actually, System 1 controls a great deal of our behavior, probably more of it, but we don't think of it. Instead, we try to come up with justifications for how we chose that using System 2. That part was not in the first chapter. It's later in the book. And that was easy. Why can one not usually do multiple System 2 tasks at once? They require your complete and undivided attention to do effectively. This question feels phrased slightly funny to me because it's like, why can't you? But I mean, it's an answer to the question, but it's kind of like, why can't you? Well, because you can't, because by definition, a System 2 task requires your full attention. But I spent enough time tweaking these, I was able to give the correct answer, and it still felt like an effective prompt. So even though it kind of raises my hackles as a stylist, I'm just going to let that one go. System 2 tasks can require such intense focus that you become blind to other events that are happening around you. Famous experiment, the invisible gorilla experiment. Not only do we not see the other events, we also don't realize that they're happening at all, or that we're missing them. That's basically the same thing. I think that's, so let's go back. Again, lexically, this is not the same thing, but conceptually, I feel that I've still provided an appropriate answer to this, and I don't care about that exact phrasing. Since this is my first review of it, if I cared about that exact phrasing, or I felt that the concept was not quite the same thing, maybe, that would be a key that this is not a good prompt and that I need to revise it. I feel like it was okay, so I'll just try to keep an eye on it in the future, just to make sure that it doesn't get any worse as the immediacy of this information kind of wears off and I'm seeing it with less context. This is describing the invisible gorilla experiment. By default, these go in reverse order. I actually don't think I want this card because I don't know if it's specifically called the invisible gorilla experiment. That's just kind of a name that I gave it because I thought it made sense. So I'm just going to disable this card. And in the future, I'm only going to be asked it in the forward direction. This is his great example of you can't multiply 17 by 24. I wouldn't in the future require myself to remember those numbers while turning left through heavy traffic. Easily recalled. Example of a System 2 behavior. Okay, so this is a new one that we need to generate. An example of a System 2 behavior is deciding how to write this flashcard, or how to design it. Speed and ease of using System 2. It's slower than System 1. Exactly how much slower probably depends on the specific task, and it requires conscious effort. Might range from medium difficulty to difficult. Slow and deliberate. Kind of gave more information that's on there, but that's an accurate characterization of System 2, so cool. If I had just said slow and deliberate, or it's slower and requires more effort, I would have also counted that as totally right. And System 2 work will be ineffective if you're unable to concentrate, I assume is what it's saying. Completely pay attention to the task. Good. That might be another way that we could have rephrased this after we had this huge complex debate about exactly how many items we should close. Let's actually just do that. So let's say, I don't know, maybe this is more precise. So this is a case where, concentrate is great on the flashcard, but completely pay attention to the task is probably better in the notes. So since this didn't make the flashcard worse, I'm going to leave it in a state where it's good in the notes. If the flashcard had been made worse by this, I would probably change it. Or possibly if I was worried about damaging the readability of the notes, I would go back and make sure that I could find something that worked in both contexts. So I'm going to say, no, this is actually good. The answer was concentrate. And most people are going to avoid interrupting or disturbing someone who's performing a System 2 task. I've finished studying my cue. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to do with this. Again, this is much longer than this would actually take me. In reality, this would probably take me 10 to 15 minutes to have flipped through that and produced these flashcards. Thanks for watching.